Hello and welcome. I'm Annie Wright. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and a trauma clinician with a specialty in relational trauma recovery. I'm also the founder of a boutique trauma-informed therapy center. And in addition to this, I'm an online course creator and a published mental health writer with my pieces and opinions appearing in Forbes, Business Insider, NBC, and the Huffington Post, among others. Every bit of my work in the world, whether this is through my clinical work, through my online courses, or through content like this that I put out into the world, is designed to support those who come from childhood trauma backgrounds to have the best adulthood possible despite adverse early beginnings. I'm so glad to connect with you, and I hope that what I share here can be of support to you. And very importantly, please remember, no matter where you're starting from, change is possible. With that in mind, let's begin this journey together by exploring today's topic. What if you were a child robbed of your childhood? So I was driving to work the other morning, winding through the East Bay Hills that are blossoming and blooming right now, when Nina Simone's Little Girl Blue came up on my playlist. I always get goosebumps when I hear this song. Not only because Nina Simone's voice is gorgeous, but because the lyrics of the song are poignant, tender, and more than a little melancholy. And the lyrics remind me of my clients, specifically my clients who grew up in chaotic, neglectful, or outright or subtly abusive homes, and who then, and even now, might self-identify as little girl or little boy or little non-binary blue. Clients who are now adults with degrees, good jobs, and who are living in one of the most beautiful corners of the world, but who still have a sad and tender little child inside of them because, for numerous reasons, they never got a chance to be a child in their childhood. So today's video is for anyone out there who can identify with being a little girl or a boy or non-binary blue, and who feels like they didn't get a chance to actually be a child in their childhood, and who is currently struggling with this in their day-to-day life. I'll share more about what being a child robbed of a childhood can look like, and the impacts I believe this can have, and more importantly, what we can do about it as adults now. So to begin, what stops a child from being a child in their childhood? I want to share a quote with you. "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men," by Frederick Douglass. Look, being robbed of your childhood is a tragedy. I really, truly believe this, and I don't use the word tragedy lightly. It is every child's innate right to have a childhood, and when this is stolen from them, it's a terrible and very sad thing. And let me be clear, when I talk about being a child robbed of a childhood, I'm not talking about not having been able to go to Disney when all your friends got to on summer vacation. Of course, it can feel painful to be left out as a kid, absolutely. And I'm not talking about your parents making you do chores and pitch out around the house when you would have preferred spending your time playing video games. Actually, there's some really great research out there about how being made to do chores as a kid can make you into a more happy and successful adult, but I digress. Of course, it can be frustrating and hard not to have all of your wants met as a kid, for sure. What I mean about being a child robbed of a childhood is what happens when a child grows up in a home devoid of the love, safety, consistency, and the logistical and emotional security necessary for their overall well-being and proper cognitive, physical, and psychological development. This is being robbed of childhood. And what can contribute to this? Unfortunately, a wide and varied variety of factors can contribute to this, including being raised in a home with a parent or both parents who are personality disordered, mood disordered, or addicted to substances and or behaviors, and where the child felt a lack of predictability and safety with the parents. Growing up in an environment where there was food, income, or environmental instability, possibly due to impaired or challenged caregivers or due to outside environmental factors. Being sexually assaulted as a child. Having an experience of being a witness to violence, whether at home or at school or in the community. Journeying through isolated or ongoing trauma of a school shooting, repeated in-person or cyberbullying, living or going to school in a dangerous and potentially life-threatening environment, and not receiving proper support to metabolize and make sense of this trauma. living in a home where the child was over-parentified and inappropriately made to be responsible for managing the moods and chaos that the adults around them created. Being raised in an environment where the child was the recipient of ongoing emotional or verbal abuse. And these are only a few examples. There are sadly so many more. Effectively, children are robbed of their childhood whenever a confluence of factors, whether inside or outside their home, creates a feeling of instability and insecurity, and where they don't get the time, space, and support to move through key developmental tasks and milestones that all children and adolescents are tasked with. What do I mean by developmental tasks and milestones? Well, developmental tasks theory is a psychological theory contributed to by many fine minds over the years, but the framework I really like was developed by a very interesting guy named Robert J. Havinghurst, PhD, who was a physicist turned experimental education researcher and professor who posited that human life falls into 6 major developmental stages and that each of these stages had critical biopsychosocial developmental tasks which, when successfully met and completed, built on one another for the maturation and progression of the individual. Before I share what Havinghurst's developmental task theory is, I do want to acknowledge the language that he used is very gendered. So there is only he and she reflected in the tasks that I'll list out now. Please know, though, that I would say he, she, and non-binary. So, Havinghurst's developmental task theory is as follows. In infancy and early childhood, birth until 6 years old, learning to walk, learning to take solid foods, learning to talk, learning to control the elimination of body wastes, learning sex differences and sexual modesty, forming concepts and learning language to describe social and physical reality, getting ready to read. In middle childhood, about ages 6 to 13 years old, learning physical skills necessary for ordinary games, building wholesome attitudes towards oneself as a growing organism, learning to get along with age mates, learning an appropriate masculine or feminine social role, again, a little outdated, developing fundamental skills in reading, writing, and calculating, developing concepts necessary for everyday living, developing conscience, morality, and a scale of values, achieving personal independence, developing attitudes towards social groups and institutions, developmental tasks of adolescents, 13 to 18 years old, achieving new and more mature relations with age mates of both sexes, I would say all genders, achieving a masculine or feminine social role, again, a little outdated, but we'll go with it, accepting one's physique and using the body effectively, achieving emotional independence of parents and other adults, preparing for marriage and family life, and preparing for an economic career. Remember, this was not written in 2024. Acquiring a set of values and an ethical system as a guide to behavior, developing an ideology, desiring and achieving socially responsible behavior. Developmental tasks of early adulthood, 19 to 30 years. Selecting a mate, achieving a masculine or feminine social role, again, a little outdated, learning to live with a marriage partner, starting a family, rearing children, managing a home, getting started in an occupation, taking on civic responsibility, finding a congenial social group. Developmental tasks of middle age, 30 to 60 years old, achieving adult civic and social responsibility, establishing and maintaining an economic standard of living, assisting teenage children to become responsible and happy adults, developing adult leisure time activities, relating oneself to one's spouse as a person, accepting and adjusting to the physiologic changes of middle age, adjusting to aging parents, developmental tasks of later maturity, 60 years old and over, adjusting to decreasing physical strength and health, adjusting to retirement and reduced income, adjusting to death of a spouse, establishing an explicit affiliation with one's age group, meeting social and civil obligations, establishing satisfactory physical living arrangements. Okay, so that's a lot. Now, imagine if you grew up with any of the earlier scenarios I listed, scenarios that could rob you of your childhood. If you grew up with a narcissist or sociopath who was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, raging one moment and then all confusingly kind and sweet the next, or if your caregiver was an active alcoholic and domestic abuser, how much emotional energy do you think you would have available living in an environment like this to devote to quote unquote building wholesome attitudes towards oneself as a growing organism, or quote unquote developing conscience, morality, and a scale of values? Realistically, not much. Your life energy would likely have mostly gone towards just trying to survive and cope with the unpredictability and lack of safety in your home. And even if you grew up where the environment was seemingly less chaotic and less threatening, how well can a child and later a teen achieve quote unquote new and more mature relations with age mates of both sexes if this child or teen was the recipient of endless criticism and messaging that they weren't good enough, they were too fat, too ugly, too loud, too much like their mother, etc.? These are comments that show up in relational trauma histories. Would a teen really have had the sound sense of self to appropriately form relationships if her self esteem was consistently chipped away at by her caregivers? Would she even be able to identify healthy and appropriate relationships? Not optimally, no. The bottom line is this: if you experienced complex relational trauma, child abuse, or otherwise robbed of your childhood's safety, security, and appropriateness, you likely would have been preoccupied to a certain extent with surviving your day-to-day reality in whatever way you could. And you may not have had the emotional, mental, and even physical ability to focus on achieving those key developmental tasks and goals. As a side note, this is why it's utterly fruitless and unfair if you come from a background of childhood trauma to compare yourself to peers and their accomplishments who came from non-traumatic backgrounds. So back to the topic. Because successful completion and mastery of developmental tasks in each life stage lend to achieving the tasks of the next. Children who were robbed of their childhood may well feel the impacts of this well into their adulthood. So what are the impacts of a child being robbed of a childhood? Let me share a quote with you. Many abused children cling to the hope that growing up will bring escape and freedom. But the personality formed in the environment of coercive control is not well adapted to adult life. The survivor is left with fundamental problems in basic trust, autonomy, and initiative. She approaches the task of early adulthood, establishing independence and intimacy, burdened by major impairments in self-care, in cognition, and in memory, in identity, and in the capacity to form stable relationships. She is still a prisoner of her childhood, attempting to create a new life. She re-encounters the trauma. Dr. Judith Lewis Herman. The impacts on adults who didn't get to be a child can be as varied and wide as the factors that contributed to their trauma in the first place. The quote from Dr. Judith Lewis Herman, a pioneer and great mind in the work of trauma recovery, sums it up. Someone raised in an unsupportive environment may have challenges with the primary tasks of adulthood: independence and intimacy, both with oneself and with others. This may look like a struggle to form and keep appropriate, healthy, and connected relationships, or not even having realistic expectations of what a romantic relationship can look like. Maybe this ends up looking like being terrified of conflict and playing the role of caretaker and having poor boundaries because advocating for yourself feels terrifying. Or perhaps this may look like an inability to self-reflect and act with self-agency on and towards the career that you truly want. Possibly this may look like living with an eating disorder to help cope with and numb out the intolerable feelings of fear and panic that you live with. This may look like being frozen with ambivalence about whether or not to start a family because you spent the first half of your life being made to caretake for everyone around you, and you fear being trapped into doing so more. Perhaps this looks like not even being connected to your body and your sexual identity because you were raised with shoulds and not encouraged to reflect on what and who you truly want. Maybe this looks like having quote unquote achieved all of the tasks that society set out in front of you: a few advanced degrees, a good job, a great paycheck, but feeling emotionally deadened and depressed on the inside at the end of the day. Whatever and however this looks for you, what's likely is that being robbed of a childhood may still have impacts on you, be they large or small. I invite you to get curious about how this may show up for you by using the framework of having Hurst developmental tasks that I shared earlier. And what do we do now if we're an adult who was robbed of our childhood? What do we do if you didn't hit some of those tasks on the checklist? I want to share another quote with you. No recovery from trauma is possible without attending to issues of safety, care for the self, reparative connections to other human beings, and a renewed faith in the universe. The therapist's job is not just to be a witness to this process, but to teach the patient how. Dr. Janina Fisher. First, we must come to terms with the reality of our past. We must face the truth that we were a child who was robbed of a childhood. And then, sweetheart, you have to grieve this. Grieving something so abstract and enormous, such as losing your childhood, can be a lengthy, emotional, and seemingly never-ending process. But if we don't allow ourselves the room to feel sad about what was lost to us, we'll hold back our growth and healing. And while it's true that we can never turn back time and get our actual childhood back, I believe with some creativity, intention, and skillful support, and even while we're still grieving our lost childhood, we can work towards any developmental tasks we may have missed, and also weave practices, behaviors, and elements into our adult life that can help soothe and meet the needs of that little girl or boy or non-binary blue inside of us. So what might this look like? Look, there are thousands of ways this can look, and it will be highly subjective to you and your personal history. This may look like a combination of seeking out professional support and doing some fundamental psychological work, even as you effort towards crafting the work and relationships you deeply desire in the world, while also giving yourself some of the tangible joys your inner child may still long for. Some reparative experiences and possibilities may look like getting into therapy to work on learning what appropriate and healthy relationships look like and how to seek out, nurture, and be in these kinds of relationships. Creating a safe and nurturing physical environment to allow yourself to feel safety that you may never have felt before. Seeking out professional support to mourn the past, learn how to process and tolerate your feelings, and address any maladaptive behaviors or patterns you developed to cope with childhood. Being responsible and providing income and job stability for yourself so your nervous system can be given a chance to relax with the basic foundation of life in place. Allowing yourself to question and experiment with who and how you're sexually attracted to, and perhaps letting yourself live this out more. Experimenting with your dress and appearance, finding what feels authentic to you and expressing this out into the world. Being mindful and curious about your value system, and if you're living them out in the world, and then pivoting and adjusting in any ways that you may need to. And it can look like tangibly giving yourself the things you longed for as a child but never got a chance to do. Going to summer camp. And yes, adults can still go to summer camps. Borrowing young adult novels from the library instead of nonfiction, despite how it looks, because you simply enjoy it. Carving out an afternoon on the weekend to play video games to your heart's content. Treasure hunting on eBay the toys your guardian may have garbage saled because you were quote unquote too old for dolls. Creating wonderful, nourishing holiday rituals for the family that you choose to build so you can have the holidays you never had as a kid. Taking that trip to Disney after all. It means giving yourself the best chance possible to have a life as an adult that's as enlivened, rich, and congruent with your soul's longings and values as possible. So again, it is incredibly sad that any child gets robbed of their childhood. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would protect the world's babies, children, and teens so that they could have all the love, safety, security, guidance, and support they need to become whole, esteemed, and resilient adults. But in the absence of that magic wand, I hope that my words can help you be curious about your own experience and what it might look like to support yourself if you identify with having been robbed of a childhood, if you identify with being a little girl or boy or non-binary blue. And remember, at the end of the song, Nina sings, "Why won't somebody send a tender blue boy to cheer up little girl blue?" You know, I always smile when I hear this line, And I think that the savior we may have longed for in our childhood, or if not a savior, simply a companion to stand with us through the pain and chaos, that person may not have come to us then, but we have the chance to be that proverbial companion to ourselves now as we face our past, grieve and mourn, and move forward, trying to build the most beautiful and enlivened life possible for ourselves. So tell me, what did this video bring up for you? What's one way in which you can support yourself now as an adult if you were robbed of your childhood? Leave a message in the comments below and I'll get back to you personally. As we wrap up today's video, if you're still not sure if this content applies to you, if you're still not sure if you came from relational trauma history, if you're still not sure if you were a child robbed of a childhood, I would invite you to take my signature quiz. Do I come from a relational trauma background? It's a 5-minute, 25-question quiz I created that can be incredibly illuminating and will point you in the direction of a wide variety of resources that can be of further help to you. Plus, when you take the quiz, you'll be added to my mailing list where you'll receive twice-a-month letters from me sharing original high-quality essays with accompanying YouTube videos and audios you can stream, all devoted to the topic of relational trauma recovery, and where I share more about me as a person, my life, and how I'm journeying through my own relational trauma recovery journey and general adulthood. My newsletters are the only place where I share intimate glimpses into my life, including photos, the resources that are supporting me, the things I've discovered that delight me, words that are uplifting me, the practices that nourish me, and more. So please be sure to sign up for my mailing list, whether or not you want to take the quiz. I'll link to these things in the show notes. Finally, thank you so much for listening to me today. I truly hope that even a small part of what I shared felt helpful to you. If you found value in this video and would like to stay connected with my latest content, please consider giving the video a like. It helps more than you'll know. Also, subscribing to my channel and turning on the notification bell ensures you're always up to date with my newest videos. I appreciate your support and look forward to continuing this journey with you. So thank you. And until next time, please take such good care of yourself. You're so worth it.